Hello, I'm Dr. Hannah Quirk from King's College in London, and welcome to this podcast on writing your thesis and avoiding procrastination. I would say writing and procrastinating are two of the things I do best, so hopefully there'll be some useful ideas for you in the next 10 minutes or so. Starting a PhD is an incredibly daunting experience because you have no idea what standard is expected of you. You know that your thesis needs to be the best thing that you can write. What really changed things for me as a supervisor was realising that there's a second part to that goal. Your thesis needs to be the best thing that you can write in the time you have available. And it's understanding the time-limited nature of the project that's critical to everything I want to talk about in this session. I have a very vivid memory of the first week of my PhD, sitting in the library and thinking to myself, what on earth could take 3 years to write? I even made myself a little plan that looked a bit like this one, that in year 1 I'd do my literature review, in year 2 data collection, and in year 3 I'd write up and probably be done by Easter at the latest. That memory really did come back to haunt me years later as I was frantically trying to finish. My basic premise was sound. It's a good idea to have a plan of where you want to get to and a rough structure of when you want to meet those deadlines. But it's so unspecific that it's almost impossible to know where to start with it, and as importantly, to know when you finished different parts of it. So where do you start with writing your PhD? A lot of people very understandably find the idea of starting writing a really daunting prospect. So they keep reading and read some more and read some more, because there's always some more things that you can be reading. I found quite a useful way to avoid that kind of panic is to start writing from the beginning. And this is where your plan comes in. If you try and think of it almost like a fitness program, you wouldn't start by running a marathon or lifting ridiculously heavy weights. You break it down into smaller chunks and start with tasks that you're capable of, and you gradually build up that work until you're capable of doing this much bigger task, and the PhD is no different. So I would start with writing things like briefing papers or summaries. If you've read the work of one of the leading theorists in your area, for example, try and write 2,000 words explaining what the key themes are or why this person's approach is important. If you read a book, try and do something like a critical annotated bibliography. That way you keep your hand in. You're honing your style, you're developing your skills of praising, but also you learn to write in your own voice, which is something that will come in time. You need to refer back to your abstract, because once you start reading, it's very easy to go off on exciting tangents and follow all these different lines of thought that other people are writing about. But you need to keep focused on your project. Remember, you've got to get your thesis written within the time you have available. So you'll refine your abstract over time, but it's useful to always keep in mind what it is that you're working on. So writing little and often is very important, and you will suddenly find you've actually got quite a big resource of legible sentences there. So when it comes to actually putting a chapter together, you've got a lot already that you can draw from. It's a good idea to study writers that you admire, whose work you like, and try and think about what it is that appeals to you about the way they structure their work, the economy of their expression, the way in which they describe events or summarise things, and try and see how maybe you could incorporate some of that into your own style of writing. Similarly, if there's work that you really struggle with, try and think about what it is that you find off-putting about the work or impenetrable, and obviously try and avoid doing that with your writing too. Part of the process of writing the PhD is discovering your own voice and trying out different ways, and the early part of your PhD is absolutely the time to be doing that. So write little and often, and don't be afraid to show it to other people and ask them for their feedback on it. My tip from bitter experience is maintain your bibliography as you're going along. It's obviously easier now with all the databases that are available to use, but particularly if you're using Harvard referencing, you really do not want to be chasing around the day before you hand your thesis in, trying to find out who Smith 2007 is. Trust me, it's not good for you. So some days you will find you don't feel like writing, you can't really concentrate on reading. You can use days like that for things like maintaining your bibliography or filing away all the articles that you've photocopied and have filed on the floor. You can use that time constructively, but it's also important to make sure, moving seamlessly now into the second part of this session, that you don't just use those techniques for procrastination. It can be a really useful exercise, albeit sometimes very demoralising, to look at how you actually spend your time each week. Now, there will be times when you've just flat out wasted an hour, a morning, a day. You can be playing Sudokus, you can be baking cakes, taking a dog for a walk, even though you don't actually own a dog. Those times will happen, and you just have to put them down to experience and try and minimise how often they happen, and we'll come back to that in a moment. The one that I want you to try and be aware of is the days when you're really busy, but you're actually busy on things that aren't relevant to your thesis. So it could be you come in and you spend time preparing your teaching, or you can be choosing clip art to go on a PowerPoint, or you're talking to other PhD students about their work, or going to a very tangentially related seminar. Some of that is important, but every single thing you need to do, you need to be thinking, is this sort of busy or is this PhD busy? And you need to think about, where do I want to get to, which is obviously having the thesis finished as soon as possible, and is this helping me to get there? And if it's something that's not directly relevant to helping you get to that stage, is it worth me spending the time on doing this? Spending time reading up or finding out about different time management techniques is an absolutely grade 1 procrastination technique, and I've investigated many of them over the years. You might find things like the Pomodoro technique useful, which is the 25 minutes to do a task with no distractions, then you have a break and move on. I found one of the most important things for me is structure. It can be one of a very disabling feature of a PhD is the lack of structure, that you've just got this thing to do in 3 years and no fixed points in between. And unless you're doing clinical work, for example, then you don't have to be in the office at a certain time. And that can be quite unsettling for people. So if you work better with a structure, you need to find ways of creating that. So either go to a gym class first thing in the morning to get you into work on time, arrange to meet people for lunch if you're not very good at having breaks, doing something in the evening to make sure that you're leaving work at the right time. So you've got an incentive to get stuff finished before you go out at 5:30 or 6 o'clock or whenever it is. Limiting social media, particularly things like Twitter, if you use it for work, it can be invaluable for work, but it can also be a massive drain on your time. So giving yourself fixed periods when you can look at it. Don't look at it on your phone, for example, you only look at it on your desktop. Again, dealing with your emails at certain times, don't feel you have to respond to everything immediately. You can put an out of office on your email on a research day and say, I only respond to these at 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And that way you actually get fixed periods of time in which to concentrate. Ideally try and bunch your tasks up together, so you could have one afternoon as your admin afternoon, one day as for teaching prep. So try and fix tasks so that you're not jumping between things too much, because you can waste an awful lot of time that way. For me, the key thing is realistic to-do lists, and it is quite a difficult thing to assess realistically. If you just say chapter 1 by the end of next month, that's a little bit like going back to my original PhD plan. It's not specific enough. And the danger is you get to the end of next month and it's still not finished. So what's quite useful is to set yourself staging posts along the way. So what will you have done by the end of week 1, by the end of week 2, end of week 3? And then each day it's quite helpful to say, rather than I've got 12 articles to read, I'll read 2 articles by lunchtime. I'll read another 2 articles this afternoon, and actually break down what can be quite a significant task. It doesn't necessarily look like very much on your list, but if you actually break it down into what you need to do, and then you can really see what you've done at the end of the week. And the other thing is building in some slack, because things will happen. You will get ill, you'll have bad days, something interesting will come along that you haven't planned for that you want to do. So giving yourself a little bit of space to deal with the unexpected is also important. If we go back to the idea of the PhD as a training program, you're going to have days when you feel great. It feels as though it's very easy, you're sailing through it, this is an absolute breeze, you will be finished in 2.5 years. You'll get other days when it feels absolutely terrifying and overwhelming, and you'll get days when you feel absolutely exhausted. What you need to remember is the only way this is going to get done is if you actually get out there and get on with doing it. So stop watching podcasts on procrastination. I hope you found some useful ideas within this talk, and I wish you the very best of luck with your thesis writing.